Well, that's my big issue today. And it's a serious issue that I think we need to discuss because it doesn't just impact Christy Martin. I mean, it impacts people across the country in the, day in and day out. Domestic violence just shatters lives. But one thing that we have seen here on In Session and that the experts talk about is many times victims stay in these abusive relationships. Well, my question today is why? And in this case, why did Christy Martin go home if she believed her husband was going to kill her? We're going to get some insight because I've got some great guests and some great experts so we can all learn something here today. Joining me, In Session correspondent Jean Casares is with us. Criminal defense attorney Nita Kay joins us, as well as forensic psychologist Dr. Cheryl Arutt, and In Session law enforcement analyst and contributor Mike Brooks. The experts are lined up. And let me start with you, Cheryl. Let's start with victims of domestic abuse. I know you deal with them regularly. So let's start with the big picture before we focus in on this case. Why? Explain to us the mentality and what happens to a victim and why they can't get out of that relationship.
Well, Vinnie, I think that this is one of the most misunderstood factors when outsiders look at a domestic violence situation. What happens in a domestic violence or intimate partner abuse situation is that the violence is used in a systematic way to establish and maintain power and control over the other person. And over time, the violence tends to escalate. It tends to happen more rapidly, very often until the victim is killed. And when people look at that and say, well, why do you stay in that situation? One of the things that they don't know is that statistically, a woman is at greatest risk of being murdered after she leaves. She's not safer when she leaves because one of the things that's the most common trigger for a lethal abuse incident is when the abuser feels that he is losing control of his victim and gets desperate. And that's when you see it escalate to a sort of, if I can't have you, no one can kind of mentality, and he responds with lethal violence.
That's the difficult part for prosecutors here, but it's all counterintuitive here as we uncover and peel back the layers of domestic violence and what really happens and why it really happens. I've got my experts back with me. I want to go to Cheryl Arutt. Cheryl, let's talk about the family now. Christy Martin, very close to her family. They were there in court supporting her every step of the way, but they had no idea what was happening to her. How much does it help or hurt a victim of domestic violence if they tell their family, their parents, their siblings, their loved ones who aren't seeing what's happening behind closed doors?
Well, interestingly, one of the traits that abusers tend to have is to try to isolate the victim from their family and their support system, and to also shame the victim and make her feel like this is happening because of something she is doing or something she isn't doing. He blames her for the abuse or minimizes the abuse. I think that it's clear that Christy felt a tremendous responsibility to protect her family. She clearly felt that the attack and the attempt to kill her was inevitable. And statistically, we know that leaving does not diminish that risk. In fact, it can increase it. She was saying that she didn't want to go to her family. On the stand, she said, because if he's going to kill me, I don't want him to kill my mother, my father, my family members as well. So she felt like she couldn't go to them out of a sense of protectiveness toward her family. And I think that we need to really look at the risk markers for lethality. People really need to know that the risk of lethal violence by an abuser against his victim goes up more than 5 times when certain things are present, when there are firearms in the home, when he has threatened her with either a gun or a knife, when he has threatened to kill her, if there are prior attempts to strangle, if he has grabbed her around the throat, if he has fled the scene after a domestic violence incident. These are all things that increase the risk of her dying of the abuse dramatically. And the more women are killed by firearms by their intimate partners than any other, I think 20 times more likely. And so that one of the best ways that we can protect victims of intimate partner violence is by disarming the abuser, by making sure that there are not firearms in the house, and by much more aggressively screening for domestic violence when we do background checks on people getting firearms. These are all very important research studies that we can use to help keep people safer.